Upon receiving an undergraduate civil engineering degree in 1974, Doug Barber joined the U.S. Forest Service. Throughout his career, Barber held positions in Utah, California, and Alaska, before becoming Deputy Forest Supervisor of Arizona's Apache Sitgraves National Forest in 1989. He then spent a year at the Albuquerque Regional Office before retiring in 1995. In February 1998, Barber sent a letter to Pete Domenici, a U.S. Senator from New Mexico, in which Barber criticized Domenici's support for grazing reform legislation that had recently been approved by the U.S. House of Representatives. Barber recounted the circumstances surrounding his letter in a June 2004 interview.
The Apache trout was named as an endangered or threatened, I think, species. And due to not only grazing impacts, but because of intermixing with other fish that had been stocked.
In 1995, the BLM's Gunnison Resource Area invited all interested parties to meet and discuss the current status and potential future of the Gunnison sage-grouse. From that effort, the Gunnison Basin Gunnison Sage-Grouse Working Group was formed to create a conservation plan that would guide management efforts aimed at reversing long-term population declines of the Gunnison sage-grouse. Dr. Clay Braun, co-discoverer of the Gunnison sage-grouse and a researcher with the Colorado Division of Wildlife from 1969 until 2002, had first-hand experience with the working group's activities. In September 2004, I asked him about the group's accomplishments.
They did an evaluation of that project in the early 2000s, might have been 2002 or 2003, and the evaluation essentially pointed out that they had failed. A lot of finger-pointing was done.
Leon Fager retired from the U.S. Forest Service in December 1997 after 31 years with the agency. During his career, he served as a wildlife biologist on the Black Hills and Apache Sitgraves National Forests. At the time of his retirement, he was the program manager for the Southwestern Region's Threatened, Endangered, and Sensitive Species Program. When I spoke with Fager in September 2004, I asked him about the effects of livestock grazing on natural fire in western forests.
What's happened to the Southwestern National Forest is that fire was part of course, the natural things that happen in the national forest, on all forest lands. And but when livestock grazing became apparent, the grasses that carried fires, which actually killed little seedlings of pine trees and other obnoxious things, weeds out there, for example, was denuded by livestock to bare ground.
During her 20-year career with the U.S. Forest Service, Renee Galliano-Pop served in a variety of capacities in the American Southwest. Initially, she worked in timber, wildlife, and mapping, then served as a range conservationist on the Apache Sitgraves National Forest. She was a botanist in the Forest Service's Region 3 office before moving to the Lincoln National Forest as manager of its wildlife, fish, and rare plants program. When I spoke with Renee at her Colorado home in August 2004, I asked her about the politics that interferes with the Forest Service's ability to protect vegetation from the impacts of livestock grazing.
The most contentious part of the Lincoln's grazing issue right now, and has been for the past 15 years, are these plants. Prickly poppy and the thistle. They have not been resolved. And, Mike, what you get, and you could interview somebody else that's more familiar with this, but I just recently was hearing all the history lately of how, for years in the consultations on these plants with these grazings, the Fish and Wildlife Service will say,
During her 26-year career in natural resources management, Martha Hahn held a number of positions in government and the private sector. She was a resource area manager for the BLM in Utah, management assistant to the superintendent of Grand Canyon National Park, associate state director of the BLM in Colorado, and finally BLM's Idaho state director for 7 years. When I spoke with Martha in August 2004, I asked her whether the rise of regional environmental organizations in the 1990s had affected the operation of the BLM's grazing program.
Idaho watersheds they were just starting to get noisy. They didn't have a mechanism to make noise with yet. And so when rangeland reform happened, they got their hammer. And the hammer was the standards and guides, and renewing of the permit. You put the standards and guides in, you have 1 year. And if that allotment is not making progress towards meeting those standards, then that was their hammer.
Steve Galizioli retired as head of the Wildlife Management Division of the Arizona Game and Fish Department in 1983, after 33 years of service. During our conversation in September 2004, Steve spoke about his experiences with range conditions on the Coronado National Forest in 1951, and with the politics within the Forest Service that obstruct better range management.
One of the first things that struck me in all that work, especially as a regional biologist, was the condition of the range, and it was shocking to me that it was in such bad condition.
Idaho State University political science professor Ralph Maughan has been involved with Western environmental issues since the early 1970s. As president of the Wolf Recovery Foundation, Maughan has closely followed the politics of wildlife management throughout the West. When I spoke with Maughan in August 2003, I asked for his insight into the politics behind the Montana cattle industry's apparent hostility toward Yellowstone bison.
Bison, which are a success story of recovery of an endangered species from 90 years ago, are by Montana state law confined to the boundaries of Yellowstone Park. And it's been the policy of Montana that if bison leave the boundaries of Yellowstone Park, which are not generally set on any topographic feature, they're simply straight lines in the forest, then they'll be shot or hazed back into the park or various other things. And this controversy has been going on for about 20 years.
During his 35-year career with the U.S. Forest Service, Don Ohman worked on national forests in Montana, northern Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming, before serving for 10 years as a district ranger on the Sawtooth National Forest of southern Idaho. There, in 1987, Don found widespread environmental damage as a consequence of historic and ongoing livestock grazing.
I was transferred here to the Sawtooth National Forest. I was district ranger on the Twin Falls Ranger District, one of the units south of Twin Falls, in about a 320,000 acre district. And we had a big range workload there. And so this was really the first opportunity that I had to really do something about some of the grazing problems.
Bob Phillips earned bachelor's and master's degrees in fisheries from Oregon State University. In 1953, he began his career in Ketchikan, Alaska, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The following year, he joined the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, where he remained for 15 years. Subsequently, he worked for the U.S. Forest Service until his retirement in 1988. In 2003, Phillips told me about his experience with the recovery of Nevada's Bruneau River, resulting from the removal of cattle in the early 1990s.
I have a buddy who lives in Nevada, so it's about a 12-hour drive to join him, but he has scouted out some of the streams in Nevada, and so I go over a couple, maybe 3 times every summer and fish with him for the last 5 or 6 years. And one stream over there in northeast Nevada, the Bruneau, there was a buyout of a ranch by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation here. It's been 10 years ago, something like that. And So according to my friend, and at least in my experience too, the trout fishing has improved greatly since the cattle were removed.
Raised on a stock ranch in central Idaho, Jim Prunty went on to work for many years in the livestock industry. Then in 1966, past the age of 40, Jim joined the U.S. Forest Service, where until his retirement in 1987, he worked at a variety of tasks involving fire prevention, fire suppression, and controlled burning. In August 2003, I asked Jim whether there are western landscapes that have not responded well to fire.
I don't know quite how to say whether it responded right to burning, because in my mind, it all burns at one time or another. And it's just how it's treated. It has a lot to do with how it's treated after a burn or time of year and that sort of thing. But mainly, how it responds after a burn is cows.
In 1988, beer maker conglomerate Anheuser-Busch purchased the Cabin Bar Ranch to acquire underground water rights potentially useful to its Van Nuys brewery. Along with the ranch, the company acquired public lands grazing permits for roughly 90,000 acres within California's golden trout wilderness. There, throughout the 1990s, government reports revealed that habitat damaged by cattle was negatively impacting populations of mule deer, songbirds, and the wilderness's namesake, the golden trout. In 1995, Todd Schumann began documenting environmental conditions in the golden trout wilderness. As a Sierra Club member, he worked within the club over the following 5 years to mobilize support for protecting the wilderness from abusive livestock grazing. He also helped to coordinate the actions of the Sierra Club with those of other environmental organizations. When I spoke with Todd in August 2003, he provided this perspective on the campaign that culminated in the Forest Service's decision of October 2000 to rest the Anheuser-Busch allotments for approximately 10 years.
I think that's what's most instructive about what we did in this case is, and most important, is we were able to construct an alliance of prominent fish groups and prominent national environmental groups, such as Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council. I think in this case it was essential to construct this alliance in order to have an impact upon both the Forest Service and Anheuser-Busch.
Doug Troutman began his natural resources career as a Yosemite Park Ranger in 1969. He joined BLM in 1976 as a wilderness ranger in Aravaipa Canyon, Arizona, and moved to Oregon's Lakeview District in 1978 as a wilderness specialist, a position he held for 19 years. Troutman spoke with me in August 2004 about his experiences with BLM's management of livestock.
In the years that I've been with the BLM, I've seen an awful lot of quote-unquote range improvement projects done for livestock, and I've seen none that actually improved the range for total purposes of wildlife and restoration and good management condition. It's always been whatever can maximize the amount of AUMs that they can pull on the land, and more cows is the purpose of multiple use management. It always seems to be to get more cows out there, and I haven't seen in Arizona and Idaho and the places that I've been down in Nevada, I have yet to see a BLM allotment that isn't to some degree overgrazed.
Larry Walker grew up on ranches in northern New Mexico, served in the U.S. Navy, and then obtained a degree in range management from New Mexico State University before going to work for the BLM in Oregon. There, beginning in the early 1970s, Walker served as a range conservationist on the Medford and Prineville districts before transferring to the Oregon State Office in Portland. Shortly after his retirement from the BLM in early 1997, he established the Range Biome and RangeNet websites with associated listservs. When I spoke with Larry in August 2003, I asked him about his reasons for providing these internet resources.
When a person starts reaching the end of a career, I think it's natural to look back and kind of assess where you've been, where you're going, where things could be going, what's right and what's wrong, and a few things like that. And while I felt that we'd made some progress in some areas, it was painfully slow, and I felt inadequate. And looking towards retired life and what may or may not have been my contribution to the greater good of things, I thought a little bit about what was the single thing, based on my experience, that could be done on BLM lands that would bring about the greatest improvement of the ecosystems, watersheds, wildlife, and all of those things. And it was to get rid of the adverse impacts of grazing. It pure and simple. Essentially, all of it is grazed, and grazing is one of the most severe impacts out there.
Charmaine Whiteface is a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. In her multifaceted career, Whiteface has been a college science teacher, an author, and a political columnist. Currently, she is a coordinator for Defenders of the Black Hills, a volunteer group working to ensure that the United States government upholds the Fort Laramie Treaties of 1851 and 1868. When I spoke with Whiteface in Rapid City, South Dakota in September 2004, I asked her about the grazing of cattle on the nearby Black Hills National Forest.
That whole area is sacred to us. Cattle are allowed to walk on sacred places because they don't know. If you go up into the hills, into an area where the trees are allowed to grow naturally, you will find sacred sites where the trees do not grow inside of that circle. Yet cattle are domesticated and they're brought over from Europe. They were not here. And they walk all over these sacred places. They walk all over our burial sites. They poop and pee and eat the grass, and it's not their fault, but it is the fault of the human beings who put them there.
Upon graduation from the University of Montana in 1950, Bill Wharf began a more than 31-year career with the U.S. Forest Service. He went on to hold positions in the Intermountain region as Assistant District Ranger, and Forest Supervisor. In 1965, he was assigned to the D.C. office to develop regulations and policy for implementing the 1964 Wilderness Act. When I spoke with Bill at his Missoula home in August 2004, I asked what suggestions he had for administrative improvement of Forest Service operations.
I think the way that the agency can help is to just be sure that the local field people are given full support from the top.